Hello and welcome to A Course in Miracles 365 here on Enlightened World Network. I'm your host, Tomas Garza, and I'm excited about today's live stream. I'm excited about all of them because it's so much fun for me to bring this live stream to you, this experience that I've had, because this particular spiritual text, A Course in Miracles, has been tremendous in my life. It has changed it completely. I should say that by going through and doing exercises like the exercises in the workbook. In fact, I've changed that. I've changed that, and it's been amazing. So I'm happy to share all of this with you. And I'm excited to jump into today's lesson because it's so fundamental. And this is why, if you're going through the workbook or with any spiritual practice, any path, whatever that is, we all highly recommend that you don't skip, right? Resist the tendency to skip ahead. And you can't really get the full effect from something like the workbook if you jump in randomly at lesson 76, for example, and then skip ahead to 235. Or if you look at the last lesson first and try to practice that, it's kind of like opening a novel to the last page and reading the last page and hoping to get the full effect of the work of art. Sort of the same thing. So what we're doing here is we're going through and we have very foundational lessons, very foundational. And if you're just joining us on this live stream, I invite you to go back and look at all of them. We've been doing this for about 2.5 weeks now, and it is really, really powerful and in depth. And we've had people joining us from all over the world. So if you're just joining us, I would recommend highly go back and watch them from the beginning. It's wonderful. You just start where you are. That's the beauty of all spiritual paths. In fact, it's a saying. Pema Chodron has a book called Start Where You Are, and that's a lot of wisdom right there. Start where you are, because we cannot do things from a different place than we already are. All we have is right now. So if you're looking to start this, there's no better time than today. And I thank you all for tuning in. So yesterday we looked at lesson 10, and we looked at the fact that our thoughts, this constant stream of thoughts that we have, does not in fact mean anything. My thoughts about this desk that my computer's sitting on do not mean anything. My thoughts about A Course in Miracles do not mean anything. My thoughts about breakfast do not mean anything, and so on, and so on, and so on. And all it takes is just a couple of seconds, honestly, of investigation to look and realize that our minds generate one thought after another. It's pretty much in an uninterrupted stream. And because we're seeing only the past, ultimately, the thoughts don't actually mean anything at all. Let's look at lesson 11 today, which says, my meaningless thoughts are showing me a meaningless world. All right, my meaningless thoughts are showing me a meaningless world. Ultimately, nothing that we see, nothing that we're thinking about, ultimately has any meaning at all. This may seem a little weird to the people that have not practiced this before. And well, I mean, it would be. That completely makes sense. This is a different thought system. I can't stress enough that A Course in Miracles aims to undo the way we currently perceive the world. Everything we look at ultimately doesn't mean anything. There's ultimate truth, or if you prefer, absolute truth, truth with a capital T, which is the whole nature, the true nature of who we are. You can sum it up in 2 words, and A Course in Miracles does that when it says God is. period, mic drop, right? That's absolute truth. In other words, nothing else really is. That what we have is in the world, in what you might refer to as 3D reality, with reality in quotation marks, because it's just apparent reality. We have the relative truth. And we've looked at this in conjunction with the workbook exercises without calling it that. And this is something that if you're a student of Buddhism or Eastern philosophy, that may be very familiar to you, the two truths, absolute truth and relative truth. Now, we're living in the world of relative truth where I'm having thoughts about everything I'm looking at. You're having thoughts about what you're looking at. I'm having thoughts about today's breakfast. You're having thoughts about your breakfast. Or if you didn't have any, then maybe you're having a thought about lunch or something. We look at different objects and we see different things. This is relative truth. We all appear to be having our own separate, with emphasis on separate, experience. That's the realm of the ego. I could look out through the window out across the street to a tree in the park in front of me and think that it's beautiful. Now, you could look at the same tree at exactly the same time and think how ugly. The leaves are falling off, the leaves are turning brown, the bark is ugly. But we could have two completely, apparently different perceptions looking at the same thing at the same time. That's relative truth, right? Ultimately, relative truth doesn't have any meaning. It ultimately does not exist at all. Our meaningless thoughts are showing us a meaningless world. So the commentary for today in the workbook for students makes it very clear. It makes it very clear that this is the first lesson in a phase of a correction process, which is really wonderful because this is what this is all about, is correcting our perception. The ego does not, of course, wish to admit ever that it's wrong. But the fact that it even appears to exist is wrong. There is no separation in truth. That is ultimate truth. So, to the extent that you're able to allow and accept that in your own mind, fantastic. To the extent that you find that difficult to grasp, or you find that you want to cling to certain aspects of our reality, like an identity, like a body, it could be any form of identity, like a job, like gender identity, even your identity as a human being, everything, right? Whatever that looks like for you, to the extent that you find yourself wanting to cling to that and say, wait a minute, no way, that can't be, this can't happen. To the extent that you're experiencing that, I would say perfectly normal. I experienced this the first time I went through the workbook all the time because I would read the ideas for the day and I would say, okay, well, this makes some sense. This makes some sense to me. I can sort of resonate with this. And then some of the time I would say, but I really don't want to give this up. I don't want to give up this portion of my identity. So that happened to me, happens to all of us. It's really quite normal. It's quite a natural part of the path. And if that's happening to you, these exercises are great for that. That's the purpose of the workbook for students, is to piecemeal, one step at a time, help us to change our minds, to correct our perception of the world, of who we really are. And today's idea introduces the concept that it's our thoughts that determine the world we see. That's important. That's the truth. It's our thoughts that determine the world that we see, and not the other way around. It says this in the first paragraph of the commentary for today. And we think that we're responding to the world, right? We run around, and this is where victimhood comes from, right? In response to what appear to be external stimuli, like the weather, like the stock market, like the world geopolitical situation, like a pandemic, anything. It appears to be outside of us, and we're responding to that. So thinking that it's in fact the world that determines our perception. Based on what we're perceiving, we're going to do this or that, or we're going to act a certain way, we're going to show up a certain way, we're going to say something a certain way, we're going to behave differently in one situation versus another, based on what we see, based on what we feel, based on what we think our perception shows us from the outside in. It's exactly the opposite. It's our thoughts, it's our inner world that determines what we see on the outside. And if that does not hit home with you, that's okay. Because one of the beauties of the workbook or meditation or yoga or any spiritual practice, anything at all, is repetition. As adult learners, we need it. We need to get information 4 or 5 different ways. One of them is going to sink in, we hope, right, with us. So however you find these practice exercises, they're designed to be short. They're designed to be no more than a minute a piece up until this point, right? Every exercise as we go forward will be different. However, they're all designed to, little by little, gradually shift our thinking about who we are. Because if we're not aware of any of this, then we're not able to change or transform or affect any kind of positive transformation in our lives. So practice these lessons. My meaningless thoughts are showing me a meaningless world. In terms of ultimate truth, yeah, absolutely. Now, here in the relative, it's nice to have heat. If you're in a cold climate, it's nice to have air conditioning. If you're in a warm climate, yeah, things like food, water are essential. Yeah, yeah. Ultimately, from the point of view of the ultimate, nothing that we see or experience here ultimately has any meaning. Our reality has always been and always will be. The period, period. God is. So let's look at some of the comments here. And thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate everyone that has tuned in to this live stream. It's been so much fun to interact with you. So let's see who's on here right now in what time remains. Well, hello. All right. So everybody, hello, Lisa. Hello. Yes. Hello, Deidre. Yes. And Cindy. Hello, my wife, Cindy. Guys, it's her birth month. I forgot to mention that yesterday. Her birthday is February 2nd, and she has declared that she's celebrating her birth month. So she absolutely 100% appreciates all the shouts out to her. Happy birth month to you, and thank you for joining me, and thank you all for sharing this live stream and for tuning in. If you have questions, please feel welcome to type them here, right here in the chat, as we have a few more minutes today. So I'm curious, I have a question for those tuning in. If you're following along here in the workbook with us, I'm curious to know from you how you're finding it right now. Are you finding the exercises liberating? Are you forgetting them? Which is fine. Yeah, there were whole days where I just forgot. I would read the idea in the morning, practice it once, and forget about it. It happens, right? It does happen. So how are you finding all these? Is there something that resonates with you? Is there something that you're finding particularly troublesome? And if we don't get to these right here while I'm live, I'll take a look at the comments later. But I'm curious because this is very much a shared experience. Spirituality is a shared experience, even though we're the ones that make the decision to show up or to sit down if we're talking meditation, whatever that looks like. We're the ones that show up moment to moment, of course, but it's very much a shared experience. And A Course in Miracles lends itself to that. So if you have questions, comments, feel welcome to type them here in the comments and I will look at them later on today. So I thank you so much for tuning in and thank you for following along with me here in the workbook for students. Now, I also want to let you all know that we're going to have some guests. I'm going to bring on some guest speakers here on the stream. So that will be happening as well. And when that happens, of course, we'll pause where we are in the workbook and we may end up pausing anyway, because some of these lessons are so hard hitting and they bring up so much for us that it's worth doing that. So yes, and then Cindy, the birthday girl here, birth month girl, let's say, says the second time through the workbook and much of it feels completely new, like I've never read it before. Yeah, isn't that funny? It's wonderful. It's wonderful to be in a place, isn't it, where we're looking at something with fresh eyes, with a new perspective, with what they call in Zen Buddhism, beginner's mind. We're doing it for the first time. Everything is so fresh and real because we're in the present moment where everything is literally love, fresh, real, vibrant, alive. It's a beautiful place to be. And as I go back through the text, as I go back through the workbook for students, I have the same experience. Yeah. When we're in the present moment, everything is alive, everything is vibrant, it's juicy. This is where we are. And to the extent that you go back through this, if you're doing this the second time, third time, or however long you've been doing this, go back in and see it with fresh perspective. It's like reading a novel and picking up on different things, or watching a movie and picking up on different scenes or different dialogue that you hadn't noticed before. The repetition is a key part of this process. And in dictating this course, Jesus definitely knows what he's talking about. He's looking, thinking, yeah, these guys really need to repeat this idea. And I'm going to say this thing in 27 different ways because someone's going to get way number 27 if I've said it 26 times, right? Think of the way we all learn. So yeah, it's beautiful. And all we're to do is to show up. If we're working on the workbook, apply the idea, just apply the idea as judgment free as we can possibly make it. So thank you all so much for tuning in, and thank you for all your comments and shares. And I will be back here tomorrow on Enlightened World Network. This is going to be, well, I'm looking at my calendar. Well, tomorrow is a very different time. I'm going to be on tomorrow at 4:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I usually start about 5 minutes after the hour. So 4 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow on Friday the 12th, as the time jumps around and fluctuates. Thank you all for joining me here today. This has been A Course in Miracles 365. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you tomorrow.